We're going to start working on Unit 2, and with Unit 2 we have a pretty ambitious list of topics here. For the most part, I'm going to be following the Chapter 2 PowerPoint. I'm not going to be putting the PowerPoint up on the screen. I'm just using it as a bullet list for the code that we're going to learn in this chapter and in this unit. There is a little bit of stuff that I want to talk about just before I begin, and it's just related to these resources that I have indicated. We already had our little talk in the previous video about what editor to choose and why. I did neglect to talk about editors for the Mac. I did mention that Visual Studio Code works on the Mac. A very good product for the Mac is Text Wrangler. That's an excellent product that's free. There's also other tools that are out there, but those are the ones that Text Wrangler is the one I predominantly use. I tend to avoid using TextEdit on the Mac because it's got a lot of little quirks to make it work. So just keep those things in mind. All right, now in terms of doing stuff in this class or any of the coding or IT classes that you guys take, there is the W3 Schools website. We talked about this last week, and the reason we go to that website is why? Yeah, they do. I'm sorry? Yeah, there's exercises, little tutorials, and things like that you can do right in the browser. But this is a site that's developed by the people that set the internet standard. So it really is kind of like the de facto go-to place for learning this stuff. The other resource that I want to point you to is lynda.com. And I have a little link here that links you through Gateway. But even if you just go to your browser and just type lynda.com, just a plain URL, you can see mine's all shortcutted here, and you log in. Yeah, I think the web is just slow, so the people that are watching me online right now, I apologize for the slow web speeds. But if you come in here and you go to sign in, Gateway students have a free subscription to this service. Lynda, if you guys have never done this before, has a super large collection of free online courses, not like a video or two, but entire courses start to finish with exercise files, complete transcriptions, excellent product. You come to this site, and you might get a little screen that says sign in or whatever, and it says sign in with your organization's portal. That's the choice you want to make, and then you sign in with your regular Gateway stuff. It'll bring you to Gateway, you sign in, and then you're inside of Lynda. Tons of stuff, especially for all the stuff that we're learning in this class. So strongly recommend it, and I put it in my course shell there on purpose, so you guys remember that it's there. I use it all the time. You know, technology comes out, it's new, got to learn it somehow, right? That's the way to do it. All right, let's jump into Chapter 2. A lot of topics to cover here. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what does HTML stand for? This almost makes me want to pull the slides over from my second screen. What is HTML? Well, HTML, we talked about this a bit last week, right? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Know that will be in the test. I was trying to get the clues, right? So know that one. That's important. We just talked about W3 Schools. W3C is the website for the organization that runs all of this. All right, I'm pulling this back up off the screen. And I'm going to create myself, I'm in Notepad++ right now, so if you don't have an editor open of some sort, please open your editor. My choice is Notepad++ for tonight. I'm going to go full screen with it, and I'll try to make the font amply large so that you guys can tell what I'm doing. Now in HTML, we're going to start writing what we call tags. Tags are also known as elements, interchangeable terms. We create markup by wrapping content with tags. And I'll give you just a really primitive example here. If you want to follow along, feel free. Watch, that's fine too. See if I can type tonight. Here's a very simple example of some content. This is just some plain old text and tags that wrap it. Notice that we have what we call brackets. So the greater than sign and the less than sign always encapsulate the name of the tag. In this case, the letter P stands for paragraph. So when I use the P tag, it's a paragraph. That implies some meaning, and we'll talk about that as we go. So when I talk about encapsulating content, if this is my content, I start with a paragraph tag, and I end with one. But notice the difference with the ending one. It's got a / before the tag that indicates that it's closing. Right? So opening tag, closing tag. The greater than and less than are called brackets. You can call this paragraph tag a tag, or you can call it an element. I tend to call them tags, so that's probably what you're going to hear me say the most. Now, the version of HTML that we are learning here in class, I'll pull the slide back over, is HTML5. HTML5 became a standard right around the time I started teaching for Gateway, which was January of 2014, I believe, or maybe it was December that they approved it. It had been in draft status, meaning that it was being used, but not approved as a standard for a good 5 or 6 years prior to it being official. Prior to that, we used some other versions. I'm going to guess that's one of the slides coming up. Okay, that's this slide here. The predominant version prior to HTML5 was not HTML4. It was XHTML, version 1 and 1.1. So that was what most of us did. And the reason we used that is because it had a very strict syntax, and that allowed us to do things like run advanced JavaScript and do some advanced CSS. With HTML4, which was the direct predecessor to HTML5, but kind of faded like before 2010, frankly. Some people still used it. That, even though it had some strict versions to it, it had some issues with being compatible across browsers because it was supported in different ways. The rules weren't as strict, so the people that developed the browsers, what rules do we follow, right? So it would cause issues, like you would try to style something, and you try to put it in one spot on the page, and it would be somewhere else. Kind of problematic. So, yeah, Internet Explorer. We can almost kiss Internet Explorer goodbye. Not quite, but almost. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right, so what is the reason for going to HTML5? I got a couple of little things here. One of the real important ones is that third one on the list, and that is basically that it does still support all the stuff that came before it. That's pretty huge, because if you think about the problem with the web is there's so many websites, should a page from 20 years ago really be completely obsolete? No, it shouldn't, really. It should still work, and that's kind of one of the points. But it does have a lot of new features, and a lot of them we're going to learn right off the bat even tonight. All right. One of the first things that we're going to learn is a thing called Doctype. You guys ready for this? All right. A Doctype, here I am with the slides again. I should just do the slideshow, right? Doctype stands for a document type definition, DTD, and this is syntax that extends from the XML language. What that is basically formally doing is it's telling the browser that's reading the code what standard we're following. What rules are we playing by? Are we playing by college football rules, pro rules, Canadian football rules, XFL? You guys remember that one? So it tells us what the rule set is. The beautiful thing about HTML5 is the doc type is very, very simple. That's the doc type for HTML5. You use the exclamation point, you say doc type, and you say HTML, you're done. Do you want to see what it looks like in previous versions? I'm guessing it's probably on the next slide here. You see that? Memorize that for your test. And guess what? Nobody ever did. Right? The way that you would get that is you'd either go to something you've done before, or go to somebody's web page, you'd copy it, or you had a program like Dreamweaver that would generate it automatically. So nobody could remember it. But if you look really carefully at it, it does have the same initial component, right? Doctype HTML. Notice here they wanted it to be uppercase. That was part of the rule. And then they had all this gobbledygook here that ultimately pointed to a website document that actually declares the rules. Isn't that interesting? So you follow that link and go to that page, if it's even a page, I think it's just a document. And there's a listing of how all the tags should be structured and what they do. What's the rules? Here they are, right? And so you would link your document to it, and then it would validate against that. Beautifully simple, right? Easy to remember. No questions. It just works. All right, so that's your Doctype. Now, when you're working with a web page, web pages have a very specific structure they need to follow. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start building out the skeleton of a regular web page in HTML. So what every web page should contain. Okay. So we have the Doctype, that's at the very top of the document. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the HTML tag. I'm sorry? Okay, no problem. Sometimes I can't hear you from up here, so. Now notice what I'm doing here is I created a little bit of space, right? So what I'm doing here in essence is I'm telling the browser what rules I'm following, and then I have an opening HTML tag and a closing HTML tag. That encapsulates the document, right? So opening HTML, closing HTML, everything else in the code is going to go in between those two tags. All right, now the next section in a typical HTML page, you can see that I indented, although that's frankly optional, is I'm adding the head tag and I'm adding a body tag, both of which have an opening and closing.
What about the title page?
One step at a time.
Okay.
Don't race ahead. Somebody was asking about the title tag. That comes next. That's actually the very next thing I do. All right, but an HTML document is broken down into these two basic areas. You got the head section and the body section. By general convention, the stuff in the body section is what typically appears on the page. It's the visible part of the page. The head section is where we put other things. One thing that we put in there, Alex, which you were racing ahead on, is we put in our title tag. And I'm going to just open it and close it right away. And typically what I do is my web page, or whatever your page is titled. And then when you render the page in a browser, what happens is that's what appears on the tab. Okay? So maybe you know that, maybe you didn't, but that is the case. So that's the title tag. Now that kind of breaks a little rule I just said, right? This is what's on the document, like the visible part. So this part is visible technically, I mean it's in the tab. But the other things that we put up here, we will put style information, scripts, links to external files, and other stuff. You want to see one of the other things that we put in here? One of them is meta tag. And what we do with this one, and you want to put this in there exactly like that. And what we're doing here basically is we're telling the browser what character set we're using. You wouldn't have guessed, right? But you want me to know what UTF-8 means, right? Well, how do I figure that out? 33 schools? Google? Your instructor? Basically, you know, what's kind of interesting is that the web is English. The code for the web is in English. So people in China sitting down to write their code have to learn how to do it in English. You guys have a leg up. At least you get the language, right? You know what the letters do. But it's telling you the character keys that you're using, and it also gives you access to various groupings of international fonts. If you were to look at a character map on your font system for Windows or the Mac OS, and you would see that when you choose a font, it's not just uppercase, lowercase, special characters, and numbers. There's also like for example, on Greek, right? There's a Greek alphabet built into the character set. There's Cyrillic. I'm trying to think. There's a few of those, you know, European type languages are natively built in. So many basic languages are achievable through UTF-8. When you start to work with languages that don't fit into that category, then you find yourself going to different character sets. So typically, you don't have to worry about that. You just throw this in there and you're usually good. But it's considered part of the standard document structure. All right. One thing that our book adds that I'm going to tell you very honestly, I don't do this by convention. I'm doing it because the book's doing it. But teacher, you tell me what this one does. Yeah, it's telling you that it's English. Yeah, it's a language attribute. And this is something we need to talk about too. These are tags, right? Opening tag, closing tag. Whenever you have a tag and then inside the tag you add something to it, usually you'll have what they call an attribute. So this is an attribute, and this is the value of the attribute. And I think it's very easy to figure this one out. But it also implies that you could set it to other languages, right? Why might that even be relevant? Sure. Or if you have like automatic spell checking or something like that, you don't want it underlining your French word and telling you it's wrong because it's your language is set to English, right? That kind of thing. But like I said, by matter of convention, I don't usually put that in. I just want to let you know that. Yes, Jim. Ah, yes, you know some old school stuff. Right. And let me tell you what he's talking about. Most tags, and you've noticed this pattern already, we have an opening and a closing. In the past, when we would have a tag that just sat on one line like this, especially with XHTML, that was considered not properly formed. So what you would do is you would put a closing tag in like this. The beautiful thing about HTML5 is you don't need to do that anymore. You can do it, and it still works just fine. And there are some scenarios where you have to do it. When you guys get to like advanced levels of programming, you'll find out why. But right now, don't trouble your minds. But I'm just telling you, for example, that you can put that there or you can omit it. The official practice is to omit it. Okay, so that's actually a very good question. All right, now we've done a little bit of work here, right? What's a fatal flaw that we have so far? We didn't save it. We didn't save our work. Remember I told you when you create a new file, first thing you should do is save it right away? Oops. Well, let's save it now. All right, so I'm just going to click the little save icon here, and it brings up my dialog. I am going to navigate to that folder we made in the previous video, right? So I'm going to go into my file system. And I probably actually don't want to put it there. I should probably follow my own convention, which is where I put everything in my Google Drive. Oh, I hate this folder view. So you're going to watch me do a little file management here. So I have Web Programming 1. I'm going to create a Fall 2016 folder. That's my pattern. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make a folder for Unit 2. And that's where I'm going to put my stuff. Okay? Not to be paranoid, but I'm going to go into my file system and make sure it's there. You guys ever do that? Is it really there? Did I save it to the right spot? Well, one way you know is if you look up here at the see Notepad++ across the top, or you can just do a file save as, and you can always trace it that way too. I always like to make sure. That's a really good question because I just saved it as new4.txt, right? Oops. All right, let's just say that. You caught me. All right, so I'm just going to come down here. I'm going to type index.html. No spaces, no uppercase, no trailing spaces. See how I'm adding spaces at the end? Don't do that. That'll burn you every time. It happens, though. All right, I'm going to put that in my Unit 2 folder where it belongs. All right, that's the right way to save. But you notice what happened as soon as I saved it? The color coding kicked in. Color coding, when you use a good editor, will help to show you that you got a problem. Because you get used to like how the colors are when you're doing certain things, and then things kind of tend to fall into place. Now, we talked already about what goes in the head and the body section, right? Typically stuff that we don't see, scripts, styles, meta tags, things like that. That's what goes up there. In the body section, the stuff that we see. Now, we already learned how to do a tag, right? We learned how to do a paragraph tag. Actually, let's do a new one. Let's do a H1. I'll tell you what that is in a second. And you have to do the obligatory hello Racine. Now, if you're curious, the H1 tag stands for heading, level 1. And if you look into all the tags that are available, there's many levels of heading tags. I think the commonly used ones usually are H1, H2, sometimes H3, but I think they go down to like 6 or 8 or something like that. But the truth of it is, once you get past that second level, it becomes pretty useless, frankly. I mean, part of that's an opinion, but I'm just telling you from practice. So I'll give you like what the book says, and I'll give you the reality. You know, like, what do people actually do? Well, this is what we actually do. Right, so there's our hello Racine. Notice my icon's red. I'm going to do Control S to save. Now I'm going to find that file in my file system. So I went to my folder, went to my Unit 2 folder. There it is. I'm just going to double click it. It's got an HTML file extension, and it will open up in my default browser someday. I did click it. I swear to God. I think I'm killing my system is what I'm doing. Yeah. Well, this machine's usually lightning fast. All right, so there it is. So what's really cool about working with HTML, what's neat about this technology is it's all file-based, right? So we create files that just sit there, and we can open them up without a server. That's pretty cool. Right? We don't need any special software. As long as we got a computer with a text editor and a browser, we can create a file. Boom, you got a web page. So it's nice and simple. So if you're able to do this, you've created a web page, right? You're already on your way. Notice the stuff that's in the title tag matches up with what's in the title. The stuff that's down here shows up on the page. Stuff that's up here does not. Okay, so those are the basic concepts there. The other thing that you need to be aware of is whenever you're looking at a page in a browser, and some of you already know this, is you can do a right click somewhere that's not on something on the page. So not on top of text, typically, and not on top of images. Try to find a blank spot. It's the ideal location. You can click this option here that's called View Page Source. Depending on the browser you're using, they might call it something a little different. It'll usually be like View Source, View Page Source, View Code, or something like that. So if you click on that and take a look, well, how do you like that? So the code that creates the page is visible to anybody viewing the page. Isn't that interesting? So especially when you're starting out, one thing that you should do, or even as you're progressing with your skills, is you go to a web page, do a right-click, view source, see what makes this page. Right? So you look at a page, and this is always a fun one for me. Go to Google, right? I mean, that's a pretty simple-looking web page. There's not a lot on it. Let's do a right-click. Let's do a view source. Boy, it's slow. I might have to close some stuff here. That should be like that. There we go. Reality check. All right, there's a lot going on here. Obviously, that's a little bit more than a paragraph tag. Can we agree? All right, there's a whole lot going on there. So don't look at a page and look at it on its cover and go, this is really simple. The layout is simple. What it's doing is not. It's extremely powerful. All right, so that's the view source. The other tool that you're going to become acquainted with in the browser, if you go back to the web page and you do a right click, see this thing at the bottom? It's called Inspect. On some browsers they call it Inspect Element. Same difference. All the major browsers have this now. If you click that, it brings up a really cool interface that allows you both to see the code in a hierarchy. So you can see that we have our HTML tags, our Doctype. You notice how I'm like hovering over stuff and stuff highlights up above? Body section. And it's got these little triangles here that I can expand and I can see my code. And it gives you information. In fact, if you look up at the top there, you can see that it indicates that I'm hovering over an H1. It tells you the dimensions it's occupying on the screen. It highlights the space that both the content occupies and the little styling elements. And we'll learn about this stuff. And then it's got all sorts of additional tools over here that are pretty deep and give you lots of information and help you when you are troubleshooting and trying to figure out problems. So this is a tool that you can find very, very helpful. You'll get to know this tool as well. All the major browsers have it. All the major browsers. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is we already talked about these heading tags, right? And I told you that there's many levels of them. So what I did is I went right to the PowerPoint, copy, paste. I'm not going to type all that. But I'm not going to keep these on here, but I want to show you what they do. So I'm just going to save this really quick. I'm going to go back to the browser, and I'm just going to do F5 to refresh. I can do Control-R to refresh, or I can right-click, reload, or refresh, or I can hit the little wheel, right, the little refresh thing. All those are equivalent. You find one that's comfortable for you. All right, so there's a showing of what the different levels of the headings do. All right. And you can see why they might be appropriate for different situations. Now, if I do go back to my code, and I throw in a paragraph tag, I'm just going to type some nonsense. You should type something real. Don't type nonsense. I'm kidding. Sort of. Save that. I'm going to go back to my browser. I'm going to do a refresh. And now you can see the difference. This is the regular size of the text. I am zoomed in, so it's bigger than it normally would be. But you can see that the regular size of text is kind of like somewhere around here, but not bold. Right? So that's why I say like the couple top ones are useful, and the ones below that aren't quite as useful. And the tags, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. Just to kind of make this a little simpler here for us, I'm kind of going to delete some of this extraneous stuff. I'm just like tabbing over to do my indents. Question, do you have to do indents? No. That's a pretty important concept. Do I have to put stuff on separate lines? I'm going to save it, refresh it. No, it still works. The process is generally considered good convention, and that's really the right word to use, to try to show the hierarchy of how things are nested. And we're going to talk about nesting. You see how the HTML tags encapsulate the whole page? Then when we get down to the body section, that encapsulates all the content. And every layer is like pushed in one level, so you can see what sits inside of what other thing. That's called encapsulation. Yes. Yes. And there's different schools of thought on that, but let me give you like a what-if scenario. Really, the thing that you're talking about, Brian, is like sometimes you'll see paragraphs, and if you're looking at code, where, right, it just goes on and on and on. But see, if you notice the line numbers on the left, it's all on one line. The text editor is kind of not showing it to me that way. But if I drop it into other text editors and look at the code, that line would go off into infinitum to the end of the world, you know, or wherever it stops. Some people will force in carriage returns in their code, but even though I just put in a line break here, it's still all the same paragraph. And watch what happens when I put it on the page. It doesn't care that I put a line break in there. That's right. And that's correct. Yes. And notice I just threw a bunch of spaces in there. I refresh it and do it a few times. It ignores them. It only reads one space. That's right. You do have, there's a special character code you put in for multiple spaces. There's other techniques too, but these are some of the basics. All right, so that's a paragraph. All right. Well, the next slide I'm looking at, slide number 12, talks about paragraphs. Well, all right. The other thing I want you to notice, and I want you to latch onto this concept real quickly. So I'm looking at slide 12 again, paragraph, and it's making a point that's pretty important. When I'm working with tags, the tags fall into two general categories: block level and inline. Block level tags have the characteristic that anything that precedes it, this is a block level tag, will appear on the page above. Anything that follows will appear on the page below. And that's called normal page flow. And it makes sense, right? I put the H1 in first, I put the H2 in second, the paragraph third. So on the page, one follows the other. The H1's above the H2, the paragraph's below. Those are block level tags. And if you want really the more formal definition of how they operate, they encapsulate the whole width of the screen within the element that contains them. All right, and you'll see what that is as we go along. So the full width of whatever space contains them. In this case, we really have nothing containing it aside from the body tags, and the body encapsulates the whole window. So those tags, like the paragraph, goes all the way across, right? All the way across, it occupies that whole space. The heading, two heading tags there, even though there's no text, they hold the whole space all the way across the screen. Now there's tags that we call inline tags, and I'm just going to give you a very quick example of one. And this is kind of a little out of sequence of the PowerPoint. But for example, if I go to this like second nonsense word that I have here, and I wrap it with a B tag, guess what a B tag does? Bold. This is an inline tag, meaning it doesn't break the page flow, it just continues on. So if I go back to the browser now that it's saved and do a refresh, you can see that that word's bolded. All I did was encapsulate it with the bold tags. All right, the next tag that we're going to learn is called a line break. So playing with this ridiculously long paragraph that we have, I'm going to throw in this tag that's very simple. It is a BR. This is an oddball tag. This tag does not formally have a closing element. In XHTML, you would see this. So some of you might be familiar with that. And if you want to use it, that's fine. However, you don't need to. You just need to do that. So I'm going to save this back over to our browser, do a refresh, and obviously this is where the line break was, right? Because you can see the text move. It only pushes it down one line. Well, let me give you a little bit of a comparison here. If I were to, let's say, take some of this stuff here and create another paragraph. So now I have opening paragraph, closing paragraph, and I save this and then do a refresh. Do you notice that when I create a new paragraph, it not only moves you down one line, it actually moves you down two? Okay, where a line break just moves you down one. So if I wanted to get the same effect with a line break, I would find a spot and do BR twice to move the same amount of space. But even though there's extra space in here, this is all still one paragraph. Now, line breaks are useful, but don't try to format your pages with line breaks. That's my one tip that I'll give you. And you'll learn this as you go. Like if you want to create all this extra space, there's better ways to do it. When you do primitive HTML, this is your go-to because you haven't learned how to style things yet. But in terms of practice, still a paragraph. All that's a paragraph, even though I have a blank line here, even though I have extra spaces here, even though I have line breaks here, it's all still one paragraph. And that is not, the paragraph here is not what we see on the screen. The paragraph is the logical container for that content. And when you think of it, how documents are formed, I mean, all this stuff follows print, really, right? You got a page structure. You might have a heading section, it gives you information, and then you have a heading of whatever content you're looking at, then you have a paragraph with the content, right? So it follows that sort of a convention. It doesn't come from thin air. All right, let's learn another tag. And this next one's called block quote. Now this one's kind of interesting because this one also stems from the print world. And first thing I'm going to do, and this is a habit I'm going to try to instill in you, is I open and close my tags and then put my stuff in. Got that? Seems kind of odd, right? But I open and close my tags, and then I put my stuff inside. All right, so watch what this does, and I probably should have some more meaningful text to work with, right? Instead of that gibberish. So what I'm going to do is what all good coders do. We go out to the web and we steal our stuff. Just kidding. If the Packers are playing tonight, I'd be at the NFL.com grabbing some content, throwing it on the screen, because that way I could show you the concept and keep up to date. But right now, we're going to work with what Donald Trump is doing, because he just happens to be at the top of the site here. And I'm not playing politics here. I just want some text I can use that I don't have to type. All right. Well, my machine is being so sluggish, I might reboot during breaks. So I'm just grabbing some stuff. And you're going to notice when I bring it back to my document, even though it's paragraphs where it was, here it's going to sit inside this tag. Just the text. All right. I'm going to save it. Go back to the browser. I'm going to go back to the tab that I had, this one. And I'm going to do a refresh. And then notice what a block quote looks like. The only difference really is what? Yeah. Yeah, it's indented. And really, if you think about English class, and I don't know if you guys even want to, right? But you should learn that whenever you, in a properly formed English document, if you are direct quoting something that takes up more than 4 lines in your document, it should be block quoted, it should be indented from both sides and separated. And that's the intent here. So that's what we're doing with it. I took it from somewhere else, right? And I should probably throw a little thing in here that says BBC, website, maybe with the URL, right? That would be the correct way to do it. So that's a block quote. Yes? Yeah, you have to spell it. This tag is called block quote. You spell it the whole thing. No. That's a really good question. It's like, why do they name it what they did? It's just, yeah, and you get used to them, honestly. And the nice thing about HTML5 is they brought in a lot of new ones now, a lot of new tags that totally make sense as to what they are. And the big move in HTML5, frankly, is changing from kind of like this cryptic approach to what makes sense and is plain English in most cases. It's predefined. You can. Yeah, at this point, all the stuff that we're doing and the styling that happens on the page as a result is default styling that the browser applies, and all the browsers basically apply the same thing. So our heading is a certain size and it's bold. There's a certain amount of space above and below. Paragraphs have an extra line break. Block quotes come in a little bit. But when we learn CSS, the styling elements, any one of those tags you can make that look like something else. Completely different. Just using CSS. We gotta learn the basics first. But that's an excellent question. All right, some of the next things that they have on the PowerPoint here, so I'm up to slide 15 at this point, and I'm just going to pull it back over, and I'm going to show you this listing that they have here, and then we'll play with it in the code. We have these tags here. We have already played with one of them, right? The first one, the bold tag at the top, and these are what they're indicating are phrase elements, all right? So these are ones that kind of enhance the text, right? And these also stem very directly from the print world. That's the concept here. So let's try these one at a time. They're not hard to use. If you have the PowerPoint up on your second screen, or if you just want to look at what I'm doing here in my code, that's fine. So since we already have paragraphs created, I'm not going to type fresh stuff. So I'm just going to kind of leverage what we have. We already did the bold tag, so that was the first one on the list. The second one is the M tag. And actually, I'm going to backtrack here a second. I know you guys probably typed it in already. That's fine. But instead of going to the M tag first, I'm going to go to the strong tag. Not the weak tag, the strong tag. Yes, my humor is waning tonight. All right, so strong and bold, in terms of the output of what they put on the screen, when you're using regular HTML, the effect is in essence identical. When we were doing XHTML, strong was the new bold. When we switched, I know it's funny, it actually is. When we switched back to HTML proper, they brought back the bold tag, which was basically eliminated in XHTML. And that's used for formatting, for making something bold, right? That makes sense. But the strong tag implies meaning as opposed to styling. Now the browser will render it bold, but the importance of strong means that there's a strong emphasis on this. This is important. It happens to turn into bold, but the point is that it's important. Now the same thing happens with the italics. Italics, thank you. It's like Italian, right? Italian. All right. So the italics tag is the letter I. And then the M tag was the XHTML emphasis tag that is the equivalent of the bold and the strong. So in other words, the italics tag will do exactly what it sounds like, and that is it'll make something italicized. But the M tag does the same thing in appearance, but semantically it means something different, that we're emphasizing things. Okay, so I mean, if you're doing it for visual reasons, you can use any of those interchangeably. If you're doing it for what we would consider semantic reasons, for meaning, you apply strong and M to the things that need to be strong or emphasized. If you're just looking to style something, you're probably better off with CSS, or you use the B and the I. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Another cool tag, this is a neat one, is a thing we call mark. And this one basically does what the PowerPoint shows, is we're marking something within the text. And stylistically what happens on the page, I saved that? Nope, I didn't save it. See, I was looking for the magic, but I never hit save. All right, is it highlights it. That's kind of cool. Pretty simple, pretty effective. So you're marking the text. There's also another one called, you can see I'm just kind of throwing these all over the place because we're just demoing them. There's one that's small. Control S to save, Alt Tab to switch screens, Control R to refresh. Catch that? Okay, I'll repeat that many times. And did I do a refresh? Do you see where that happened? Because I'm not. Oh, I see it. Small. Makes it a little smaller. It's not very specific, but it did make it smaller. All right. A couple others that they're demonstrating here is sub and soup. Subscript. I'm just going to do both of them at the same time. And let's go drop down the line. And I assume you guys know what this is. All right, so there's my superscript. Sits up a little higher. And there's my subscript. Sits down a little lower. Okay. Footnotes. Mathematical notation, just because it looks cool. It's your choice, right? The codes for those are all the ones that we just did. Yes, sub and SUB and SUP. Another thing that you want to be really careful of, and actually instead of like typing it in, I'm just going to show you on the slide, is what they're referring to as proper nesting. So when you're creating code and you start a paragraph tag and you end a paragraph tag and all the stuff that goes within, right, the content goes within, that makes sense. But what if you have another tag inside of it? So I'm deciding that everything inside this paragraph is going to be italicized. So I put one of those at the beginning and one at the end. But notice, it's inside the paragraph tag. I don't want to take that and put it here. right? Nesting means that if I start inside, I end inside. Same thing with the strong tag. Starts inside the italics tag, I didn't say it, and ends inside that same tag. If I move this here in between, no good. Now, the silly thing is, with the kind of HTML we're doing so far tonight, really, really basic, it'll work. It'll understand what you're doing. Where it breaks is when you try to style things with CSS and when you throw in JavaScript. If things aren't properly formed, you got some trouble. Let's get this back up out of the way. All right, we're at the point now where I think we're at a good stopping point for a break and a fresh video. So I'm going to end this video. We're going to do like a good 5 minutes or so, and then we'll start back up again.